All right, at this time, do we have any children to go to children's church? If they want to head out, that's fine. Thank you for bearing with me this morning. Angela's on vacation, and I said a couple weeks ago that I could lead worship for her, but I didn't anticipate trying to cut off my finger. And so that's the first time in 2 weeks I've played guitar. So, and it hurt. I'm going to be honest with you guys. So just want you all to know that as I try to concentrate with this throbbing mess of a hand over here. But again, happy Memorial Day. And I want you to know, as you turn to Matthew chapter 2, I've been praying quite a bit this week just about our steps forward at Kingsville Baptist Church as we engage and develop others. And I want to share with you a simple strategy before we dive too deep in. And also, I almost forgot, Summer Ostermeyer graduated high school last week, so I want to give a hand for her. Applause is great. Gift cards are better, so if you want to get her a gift card, pass that her way, that would be great. And they got married or not married. Oh my goodness, sorry. I told you this finger is really good to me. They graduated indoors in the air conditioning. So tell your school I said, I've never written a school check, but I might do it just for that. Graduation's in Alabama in 105-degree heat and 75% humidity in a football stadium. I don't know who thought of that, but they should be arrested immediately. But the simple strategy I want to share with you, going back to my earlier train of thought, is a friend of mine developed this years ago, and he called it the IQ strategy. And it's 3 I's: invest, invite, and involve. So no matter what happens here at Kingsville Baptist Church, we could have the most dynamic preaching on the planet. We could have the most incredible music you've ever heard. What you saw this morning was like, we've got it, right? We could have seamless technology. We could be advanced in every way, shape, and form. But the reality is, people don't go to church because of any of those things. People go to church because they want to know the truth, and they come because someone they trusted invited them. They come on the arm of a trusted friend. So if we don't invite and invest, people won't come. So, think about the people that are closest to you, your coworkers, your neighbors, your friends. Invite those people. Tell them, hey, I want you to come with me. And not only do you invite them, but you serve and you share with them when you do that. Something that I've done in the past, it's hard as a pastor to do this because people want to visit for a long time after church on Sunday, and you get random phone calls at night. But when you invite them to church, I say, hey, why don't you come to church and then come over for lunch afterwards, and we'll just hang out. And for some of you, you said that's way too much one-on-one time with somebody. I'm not going to do that. But I would say take them out to eat, but that'd be a 2-hour trip for you. But invest in them, serve and share with them, invite them. To church, Sunday school, your men's groups, your women's groups, the Bible studies that you're part of, and then ultimately involve them in what you're doing. And I've seen this over and over and over again, and it works. People that you just invest in, you invite them, and then you involve them in what you're doing, they stick around. They see what God's doing in your life, and they want that in their life. So it's just something for you to think about. As we move into Matthew chapter 2, we've talked about Jesus' genealogy. We've talked about his conception by the Holy Spirit. We've talked about the visit of the Magi. And now, today, we're going to talk about one of the most tragic events in the New Testament. And I'll forewarn you, as I wrote this sermon this week, and I told my wife this, I think I cried almost every single day as I wrote this, because this is when Herod kills all the baby boys in Bethlehem to try to get rid of the Messiah. Now, the Bible is a book, and as a book, it uses literary tools. And my wife's an English teacher, and so I've told you before, she'll give me answers to questions. I think I was telling her Wednesday night Bible study, sometimes I'll ask her, do I use a semicolon here, or what do I use? And she'll say, well, that's a whatever, something clause, and so you want to do this? And I'm like, that's not what I asked. I just asked, do I use a semicolon or not? I don't need to know all this other stuff. And I remember sitting in Greek class at Ozark Christian College, and my Greek professor saying, you know in English how when you have an indirect object, you'll change the verb here? I was like, no, I did not know that we did that. I was completely unaware my whole entire life until just now that we did that. And I wasn't caught up in all the tools that we use in the language. It's just something that I speak. But one of the tools that the Bible uses is called typology. So in the Old Testament, you'll have different characters, different events that are types that are foreshadowing what is to come in Jesus. So the whole book of Hebrews, if you study Hebrews is basically a sermon, the whole entire book, about how Jesus is the true priest of his people. He is Melchizedek. He is the true and better, the ultimate, the preeminent type of what came before him. And Sinclair Ferguson, a theologian, he wrote this about the word typology. He said, the Greek word typos means, among other things, a shape. He says, so when you use a typewriter, whatever letter you press, you're leaving its shape on the page. And he says, some people might not know what a typewriter is, and I'm showing my years, but that's how it works. The shape leaves an impress. The idea of typology has to do with the New Testament indications of patterns of people in the Old Testament who were, in a sense, created to serve as prefigured shapes of what Christ would do. So Adam, Paul says that Adam was, or Jesus was the second Adam. We had the first Adam and the second Adam. So Adam was the first pure man. Jesus was the final pure man. Again, in Hebrews, Melchizedek was a great high priest. Jesus is the ultimate high priest. Moses was the leader of the exile, but Jesus would be the fulfillment, the complete one who exiled his people into freedom. And so Jesus is the fulfillment of all of God's promises. So as we'll see in our text today, there's an unbreakable link between the exodus of the Israelites and Jesus ultimately freeing us from our sinful conditions into true peace and harmony with God. But unfortunately, we share in their same failure. The Israelites, once they were out of slavery, where did they want to go? Back into slavery. I mean, even one of the saddest statements of the Israelites was that they missed the food. And when they were in the desert, they said, man, we had some pretty good food when we were slaves. So, like, you were going to be a slave with food? Like decent food that eat manna? In Psalm 78, this psalm was written as a warning and reminder to the Israelites of what had happened. It says that he drove out nations before them. He apportioned them for a possession and settled the tribes of Israel in their tents. Yet they tested and rebelled against the Most High God and did not keep his testimonies, but turned away and acted treacherously like their fathers. They twisted like a deceitful bow, for they provoked him to anger with their high places. They moved him to jealousy with their idols. When God heard, he was full of wrath, and he utterly rejected Israel. He forsook his dwelling at Shiloh, the tent where he dwelt among mankind, and delivered his power to captivity, his glory to the hand of the foe. So the Israelites would repeat this psalm to remind them that after they experienced freedom, they went back into captivity because they went back into idolatry and they had forsaken the word of the Lord. And we have to be very careful that we don't do the same thing. After we experience true freedom, that we don't go back into bondage. Galatians 5:1 says it was for freedom that Christ set us free. Therefore, keep standing firm and do not be subject again to the yoke or a yoke of slavery. So we are free people because of what Jesus accomplished on the cross. But the road to the cross in Jesus' life was preordained by God. It was specific, and we need to know how he got there. So if you would, I want you to look at, I said Matthew 2 earlier, but Matthew 1. Matthew 1, 13, no. Matthew 2. No, Matthew 1. No, I'm just kidding. I'm going to say that time. I'll tell you, this finger will get to it. Matthew 2, 13 through 18, I'm sorry. It says, now when they had departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, rise and take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you. For Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him. And he rose and took the child and his mother by night and departed to Egypt, and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet, out of Egypt I called my son. Then Herod, when he had saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, became furious, and he sent and killed all the male children in Bethlehem, and in all that region who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had ascertained from the wise men. Then it was fulfilled what was spoken by the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping, in loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be comforted because they are no more. I titled today's message, Weeping in Ramah, for a reason. When we celebrate Christmas and we sing Advent hymns like O Little Town of Bethlehem, how still we see thee lie. I think this is maybe one of the most overlooked points of Scripture when it comes to the Christmas story, because Bethlehem was a bloodbath. It says that Ramah, she wept for her children. Rachel wept for her offspring to the point that she couldn't be comforted because they are no more. And so Jesus' survival in this flight was dependent on the slaughter of upwards of 20 little baby boys. It's interesting in the Gospels, it's never mentioned that Jesus goes back to Bethlehem again. If Jesus did go back to Bethlehem, how do you think he would be received as the sole survivor of the massacre that killed all the innocents? Probably not well. Probably not well at all. Bethlehem, this tiny little city, felt weeping, the likes of which most of us can never understand. I lived in a small town growing up in Alabama, and it was smaller than Kingsville. And I remember when I was about 7 years old, we had a plane crash outside of town that killed 7 of our local residents. Everyone on board the plane died. And I've said before, that moment in my town's history, you could feel a difference in the town after that moment. We were such a tight-knit community. There were so few people. You think about places like Wichita State University, when their entire football team dies in a plane crash. And to this day, Wichita State does not have a football team. You think of Marshall, Texas. The same things happen. These communities remember this kind of pain for generations to come. It's residual. But in this text this morning, in verse 13, we see, it says, when they had departed, that's speaking of the Magi. So the Magi, they're approached in a dream, and they're told by an appearance of the Lord, do not go back to Herod because he wants to seek out this little boy. So they depart, and then the Lord appears to Joseph in a dream. And this time, it's interesting to me because it's the Lord himself appears to Joseph in the dream. This isn't an angel, this isn't a messenger from the Lord, but the Lord himself appeared to Joseph. And he said, take the child and his mother, flee to Egypt, remain there until I tell you, because Herod's going to try to destroy this child. So there's 4 things there. Get up, take the child and the mother, flee, and remain there. So Herod originally wanted to kill Jesus, and when that plan was thwarted, he decided to kill every little boy. in Bethlehem. And in verse 14, we see a characteristic of Joseph that I had pointed to last week, and that is that Joseph obeyed immediately. Joseph immediately got up, took Jesus, took Mary, fled to Egypt, which is about 75 miles away. That's why many people believe that the gifts that the Magi left, the gold, the frankincense, and myrrh, those were providential provisions for their trip, their flight to Egypt. So he left immediately. And I brought up the fact that in modern Christianity, especially in the social media era, we have this obsession with appearing obedient without actually being obedient. And Joseph was a man who was actually obedient. He obeyed the Lord immediately. And it says in Romans 6:15-16, it says, "Are we to sin because we're no longer under the law of grace? By no means. Do you know what? Do you know that if you present yourselves to anyone as obedient slaves, you are slaves to the one you obey, either of sin, which leads to death, or of obedience, which leads to righteousness." I think it's interesting that it doesn't say sin and good, or sin and righteousness. It says sin and obedience. Obedience is the righteous response to what God has done. Because of who God is, when He tells me what to do, my only response is to do the thing He called me to do. So when we're told to love others, what's our response? We love others, even when they're incredibly annoying. When we're told to forgive others, the only right response is obedience, to forgive. A good friend of mine, Keith, he told a story years ago in a sermon he preached that has stuck in my mind forever, especially if my kids were very young then. As they get older, I'm more and more aware of this. His mother had told him not to do something. I can't remember what it was. And he kept sneaking off trying to do it. And she said, "Keith, I told you not to do this." And he said, "I know, Mom, but I'm being careful." And he said that his mother looked at him. She said, "I did not ask for your careful disobedience. I asked for your obedience, complete obedience." God is not interested in our careful disobedience of Him. "Well, I know you said not to do this, but I'm going to be real careful as I do it." No. He's not interested in that at all. He wants, and He deserves, complete and full obedience. And I wrote down these two questions. What would happen today in your life? In your life, if you started practicing immediate obedience to what you already knew that the Lord had commanded? How much would your life change? It'd be drastic for most of us. Now think about our church. If every single one of us in this room started practicing immediate obedience, how would our church change? It'd be drastic. We'd have to have church in the field. There'd be so many people here, we wouldn't be able to contain everybody. And then if you think about our nation, if our nation started to practice just immediate obedience in one area alone. I listened to a great sermon a couple weeks ago from a pastor that said, when it comes to sexual sin, if in our nation, that one area alone, if our nation just started abiding by the Word of God, he said, think about how it would completely transform the landscape of our culture. There wouldn't be infidelity, there wouldn't be divorce, there wouldn't be fatherless homes, there wouldn't be abortion, there wouldn't be orphans, unless it was due to tragedy. It would completely transform the landscape and fabric of our country. It would be unrecognizable. I want to be a person who practices immediate obedience, and I got to be honest with you, I struggle with this all the time. Even this morning, I was sharing with some of you that I ran to the donut place in Pleasant Hill, and when someone pulled up behind me in the drive-thru, in my mind, it was like the greatest injustice had ever been performed to me in that moment, that I got blocked in at a donut restaurant. I was losing my patience over a donut that I don't need to eat anyway. So I know the struggle with this. It's hard because we want delayed obedience and we want immediate gratification. And those two do not work out. So he obeyed immediately. And then verse 15, it says that not only did he obey immediately, the command from the Lord was to remain in Egypt until the Lord gives word to come out. Now, the Israelites were delivered out of Egypt, but the Messiah goes where? To Egypt. So this is again where we see those types come into place, these types and these shadows. And to remain there in Egypt until the Lord gives word means to live with uncertainty. You know, my kids, I love my 3 children. And my boys, there are times where I'll tell them, they'll ask if they can do something. Daddy, can we go for a bike ride? And I'll look at my clock, because I know that we've got something to do, and I'll say, in 10 minutes, we can go for a bike ride, okay? In 10 minutes. But I have to finish this right now. I'm cooking something, I got to take it out of the oven. They won't even make it 2 minutes. And they'll say, hey, has it been 10 minutes yet? Has it been 2 minutes? Anyone else experienced this in your life? Yeah. So are we there yet? It's like, yeah, we got there. I just kept on driving because you guys drive me that crazy. I've literally told my kids, Daddy just missed his stop because you would not quit saying, are we there yet? Are we there yet? So now it's going to be longer. But I mean, to live with this kind of uncertainty, for God to say, I want you to go. Okay, how long do you want me to go? Until I say stop. Well, I don't like that. Some of you in this room, you have trust issues with your GPS on your phone. Like, you're like, I don't know about that. It says turn right here. You're like, I don't know about that. I think I know a better way. So when God tells you, I can only imagine, if God says, hey, I want you to do this, well, until when? Well, until I say stop. That's hard for us because we want to see the end. We want to know what the final destination is. You know, I was telling, I think it was Linda Davis, I said that my mom's a worrier. She has worried my whole entire life. She worries enough for everyone in this room. And there's a reason why when I injured myself a couple weeks ago, I didn't call her until it was all said and done. Because if Amanda would have called and said, hey, Brandon cut his finger, it wouldn't be that I just cut it with a pocket knife. It'd be that I'm inside of the road with my car flipped over, and I have my finger cut, but there's also glass in my neck, and then I injured 5 other people. She's just that kind of person. It's like the compound interest version of worry. It just gets bigger, bigger, bigger. And when somebody said, should I call your mom? I said, don't call my mom. Don't call her. It's like, because I know exactly what she's going to do. But she used to worry, and I said that when I was 18 years old, and I would play electric guitar for some of these Christian bands, these like famous Christian bands. I use famous in air quotes because they weren't that famous. But I remember driving to Denver, Colorado with directions written down on an Arby's napkin. And it was like, drive 500 miles on I-70, look for this building, turn right at this exit number. And no cell phone, nothing, just like went. And I bet the whole time my mom just had stomach ulcers, just sitting there in the living room, like, he's dead, he's dead, he's dead, he's dead. He's playing his guitar for some homeless guy at gunpoint. That's just like, there's no telling what she thought. But she worries because she wants to know everything's going to be okay. And I know that there's some of you in this room that you want to know everything's going to be okay. And for Joseph, this example he sets for us, not only does he obey immediately, he does what God tells him to do. He goes to Egypt, as we see next week. The Lord's going to tell him when Herod dies to come back. But they go to Nazareth instead of Bethlehem. So we have to trust and live with this uncertainty. So we obey immediately and then live in the uncertainty. So here's a great example, a great application for us all. So when God says that we're to forgive others, okay, what if that person didn't ask for forgiveness? Or what if in your mind they don't deserve forgiveness? Well, what did God say? So it would be really easy in that situation if someone's wronged you to say, well, I'll forgive them when they come to me and say they're sorry. Well, that's not how this works. And you could wait your whole life. You know, one of the questions I asked when I was in college, I was in a biblical counseling class, And I asked a question, and I still remember the class laughing when I asked this question. Because we were talking about forgiveness and grief. And I held my hand up and I asked Dr. Buckner, who was our counseling professor, I said, what do you do, though, when the person that you need to forgive, what do you do when they're dead? And people started chuckling in class. And Dr. Buckner said, no, this is important. He said, this happens all the time. In this room, how many of you have been wronged by someone who's no longer alive? And you never got to talk about it. You never got closure from it. You never had a conversation. So what do you do with that? And so we talked about some different ways that you can forgive those who are no longer with you. So this is hard, this kind of uncertainty, to live with that uncertainty and obedience. And then in verse 16 it says, when Herod saw that he had been tricked, remember he was extremely cunning. And not only was he cunning, he had 2 of his own wives killed. And then I told you last week, he had several of his own children killed. He killed 2 of his sons himself. They died by his own blade because he perceived them as threats to his throne. So in his fury, he had all the male children under 2 in Bethlehem killed. This event is called, if you look at most older commentaries, the massacre of the innocents. So Herod sends out a century of soldiers. This would be 80 soldiers, and they break up into 10 groups of 8. He sends a century of soldiers 6 miles south to Bethlehem to start butchering these boys. Again, this was a massacre. And as they descended onto that town, can you even imagine the chaos? Bethlehem, land-wise, is not even as big as Kingsville. You would have been able to hear the screams from 3 streets over as these soldiers began to butcher these small children. So the fury of an evil magistrate ended up in the death of these innocent boys, and it was pure evil. And make no mistake, one of the things I noted as I studied this was they wouldn't have just killed the children too. Because if you're a dad, how many of you dads in this room, you're going to fight to the very last heartbeat to protect your children? Mothers and children and fathers murdered because of a maniacal ruler. Psalm 2, 1-4 says, why do the nations rage and the people plot in vain? The kings of earth set themselves against God, and the rulers take counsel against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us burst their bonds apart and cast away their cords. And then listen to what it says about God in verse 4. He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord holds them in derision. So every time an earthly ruler makes plans to quote-unquote attack God, in heaven God laughs. Because there is no one that can thwart him. No one that can overpower him. But then in verse 17, it says that this happened to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet Jeremiah. That there was a voice in Ramah weeping. The word there literally means wailing, with loud lamentation. So Jeremiah, the weeping prophet, foretold of the weeping mothers in Bethlehem when their boys would be slaughtered. They would experience and be marred by a generation of murdered sons, fathers, fatherless homes. And this, again, as I said earlier, this is a pain that will last generations for them. It's not going to go away anytime soon. You know, as we celebrate Memorial Day, we remember those that we have lost, that served in our armed services, that paid the ultimate sacrifice with their lives. When I was in college and high school, that was whenever all my friends were enlisted in the Army to go overseas to Iraq and Afghanistan. I have several friends that have died, who have perished, fighting in wars, trying to defend other people. I've gotten phone calls so many times now of those who, even after combat, came back home and the post-traumatic stress was too much and they've ended their own lives. I've sat through too many 21 gun salutes. I've sat through too many folded flags on top of caskets, and it breaks your heart when you look into the eyes of a mother who will never see her son again. It's gut wrenching. A couple years ago, I was at church, and we were talking about what we were going to do for Veterans Day. And we had a youth pastor at the time. He was very young, and on top of that, he was very immature, on top of being young. And I said, so do we have any ideas how we want to honor our veterans? Do we have any ideas what we want to do? And what he said just made me shudder because I couldn't believe something so callous would come out of someone that I knew and I somewhat respected. But when I said, what are we going to do to honor our veterans at church? And this is a staff meeting full of people. He blurted out, who cares? And I said, I was in shock, and I said, what? And he said, who cares about these veterans? And he said, this is church, it's about Jesus. Like, who cares about our veterans? And he said, they knew what they were signing up for when they did it. And the only thing I could get out of my mouth, this is where I told you, like, immediate obedience and forgiveness. I'm not good at this. I said, only a sissy like you could say that because of real men who went and gave their lives. And I was like, how dare you say something like that about these men and women? And I went home immediately for lunch, and I told Amanda, I said, man, I can't even wrap my head around this. And I said, am I in the wrong? Am I overthinking this? Tell me if I'm wrong here. And Amanda, her brother served in the Army. Her brother-in-law served in the Marines. Her dad was in the Army. My wife comes from a military family. I was in the Lord's Army. So, sorry, I was trying to lighten up the mood here. So Amanda said, no, absolutely. And Amanda talked about how many nights that her mother would pray on her hands and knees, face on the ground, that God would bring her son home. You know, I told you I've sat through too many services. I've done too many funerals where I look at a little baby girl or a little boy that will never hear the laugh of their dad again. This pain is unbearable, and there is weeping and there is wailing, and it does not go away. There are those of you in this room who've lost someone precious to you to war. And for those of you, I say God bless you and be with you during this time. I know it is hard. These two little missionaries that died in Haiti, do you think there's weeping in Neosho, Missouri today, in Claremore, Oklahoma? Absolutely. Now, ultimately, the Lord will dry their tears, and their pain will be no more. But in order to preserve his throne status and power, Herod was willing to kill every little boy in a rural town just outside the city. And I told you this week, I was filled with grief and tears as I wrote this message because when I look at the text, I have to look at what does this say, what does the church need to know, and how does it apply to us now? How does the Word of God apply to us now in 2024 in Kingsville, Missouri? And when I was in my office reading this, I thought, man, all of that for a throne that he's going to lose anyway. He's going to die in just a couple of years. When this thought hit me like a Mack truck, we have people here in America that slaughter their own children for a lot less than a throne in a kingdom. They do it because they don't want to lose their bikini bodies. They don't want it to impede their careers. They don't want to wake up at 6:30 in the morning with a colicky baby, so they literally terminate the lives of their own children. It's not a wicked ruler doing it. They do it themselves. I wrote this down as I studied this. So what Herod did was awful. Like I said, estimates show that this was probably around 20 children he would have killed. In my lifetime, on this Memorial Day, I told you 2.2 million soldiers since World War I have been killed here in America. But when it comes to worldwide genocides, worldwide tragedies, where rulers or people tried to kill entire groups of people, in my lifetime, so since the 80s, early 80s, 2.5 million people worldwide have been killed in acts of genocide. Most notably in my lifetime was the Rwandan genocide, where the Tutsis and the Hutus, over 1 million people were killed in cold blood with machetes, all because they came from the wrong tribe. If you are 65 years of age or younger, in your lifetime, 11 million people have been killed in genocide. So worldwide, 11 people. Most notably in your lifetime, if you're 65 or younger, the Khmer Rouge incident in Cambodia, when over 3 million Cambodians were slaughtered because they had Viet or Chinese blood. And if you're over 80, in your lifetime, 27 million people have been killed, most notably the Nazis and the Soviets, killing upwards of 8.5 million people just because of how they were born. Now, we hear those numbers and we think, goodness gracious, 27 million people in a lifetime on this planet murdered in cold blood just because of who they are. But I want you to hear this for perspective. Since 1973 in America, 63 million babies have been aborted. In America alone. That is more than every world war of mine and your lifetime put together. Abortion clinics have killed more people than Hitler, Pol Pot, Stalin, any of them could have ever dreamed of. And we do it in the name of health care. And I know there's some of you that might think, look, I don't come to church to hear about politics. This isn't politics. This is ethics. This is about obedience to God. These are people that are made in God's image. They're human lives. They know that they're murdering them. They don't lie about it. They have no shame. And just as there was weeping in Ramah, there needs to be weeping in our republic. This country should be on its knees. I've said for years, I cannot believe God has let us go this long with what we do. And what's so crazy to me is in America, where we kill 63 million children, we call ourselves civilized. We think we're better off than third world nations because we have iPhones and 5G internet. What good is all the technology in the world when you don't even know the value of a human life? This is atrocious, but we're so desensitized to it. I've shared with many of you, one of my best friends in the world, he lives in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And his whole entire life, his country, formerly Zaire, has been in civil war. And I asked him one time, I said, Tracy Ward, how do you function with all of this death all of the time? And he said this to me. It's literally like having the fan on. That's just the way it is. That's all we've ever known. Well, in America, all that our young people have ever known is this horrible practice of abortion, infanticide. And for those of you who are not rightfully uncomfortable yet, I want you to get there. But in Virginia, just a few years ago, there was debate on their Senate floor as to what to do if a baby survived an abortion. And panel after panel said that they would just let the baby die or they would drown it in the formaldehyde tank. This is in the United States of America, supposedly the most advanced country on the planet. I don't buy it. I don't buy it at all. And man, if you support that stuff politically, you need to check your heart with the Lord. I mean, that is downright evil. What Herod did was atrocious. Like I said, to protect his own throne, he at least had an empire. But we have people now killing their own children because they want to be TikTok influencers. They want to have a successful YouTube channel. I've literally listened to these interviews, and it guts me. Because I've got a little girl in that nursery, and I know that sometimes she can be a pain. Sandy, I'm sorry she screamed at you on Wednesday. But I would give my life for any of my kids. I'd give my life for any kid in this church. And to think that in cold blood, their lives would be ripped away from them. God, forgive us. Church, this is so horrible. And I don't know how we got so desensitized to it, but I pray that God would renew our hearts, that we would intervene for these kids. I don't even know what to do. I laid face down in this sanctuary and said, Lord, would you please bring it to an end? Do something. And the only thing that brought me comfort was when I turned to Psalm 30. It says, to you, O Lord, I cry. To you I plead for mercy. What profit is there in my death? If I go down to the pit, will the dust praise you? Will it tell of your faithfulness? Hear me, O Lord, and be merciful to me. Be my helper. You have turned for me my mourning into dancing, and you have loosened my sackcloth and clothed me with gladness, that my glory may sing your praise and not be silent. O Lord my God, I will give thanks to you forever. I have no doubt that the first person to greet these sweet little boys that were slaughtered in Ramah was the Lord Jesus Christ himself. And they were safe in the arms of God. For Natalie and Davy Flowers, killed doing mission work in Haiti, the very first person to greet them in the new life was the Lord Jesus Christ himself. And their mourning has been turned to dancing. There is no death. There is no pain. There is no more of this wickedness that we know. And thank God for it. So I know this is heavy on our hearts, but wicked leaders throughout history have targeted children to carry out their plans, their self-harm and their bodily harm. And I want us to pray for our country, and I want us to realize that as Jesus escapes, he leaves to go to Egypt only to go to Calvary's cross. And Jesus isn't going to die because of the sin of one man, Herod. He's going to die for the sins of every Herod who ever lived. And he's going to absorb God's wrath. And if you don't know that forgiveness, today is the day to make that happen. To call on the Lord for salvation and say, I want to immediately obey you. I want to follow you with everything that I have. If maybe you've drifted away, today is the day for new habits and for the Lord to sanctify you and help you live for him. If you don't have a church family, I want to invite you to join the fellowship here at Kingsville Baptist Church. On this Memorial Day, I encourage you, remember those in our armed services who gave their lives that we could enjoy our barbecues, sleeping in at home, whatever it is. Remember the missionaries who give their lives to advance the gospel. And remember the men and women throughout this history. As we read Jesus' genealogy, the men and women who would die and not see that the Messiah was coming, but they were faithful to the end. Remember them this Memorial Day. If you would you stand with me? And we'll sing here this moment.